Hi everyone, welcome to Vicky's NEET Prep. In this video, we are going to discuss about Class 11 Biology according to NCERT textbook. In Class 11 Biology, Unit 5, we have Human Physiology. In this, we have 7 chapters. They are digestion and absorption, breathing and exchange of gases, body fluids and circulation, excretory products and their elimination, locomotion and movement, neural control and coordination, and chemical coordination and integration. In these chapters, in our previous videos, I had discussed about digestion and absorption and locomotion and movement. The links are available in the description. You can view them later. Now our present topic is neural control and coordination. The topics in the chapter are neural system, human neural system, neuron as structural and functional unit of neural system, central neural system, reflex action and reflex arc, sensory reception and processing. The introduction of this chapter is as follows. The function of the organ or organ system in our body must be coordinated to maintain homeostasis, that is to maintain a certain temperature. Coordination is the process through which two or more organs interact and complement the functions of one another. For example, when we do physical exercises, the energy demand is increased for maintaining an increased muscular activity. The supply of oxygen is also increased. The increased supply of oxygen necessitates an increase in the rate of respiration, heartbeat, and increased blood flow via blood vessels. When physical exercise is stopped, the activities of nerves, lungs, heart, and kidneys gradually return to their normal conditions. Thus, the functions of muscles, lungs, heart, blood vessels, kidney, and other organs are coordinated while performing physical exercises. In our body, the neural system and the endocrine system jointly coordinate and integrate all the activities of the organs so that they function in a synchronized fashion. The neural system provides an organized network of point-to-point connections for a quick coordination. The endocrine system provides chemical integration through hormones. The neural system. The neural system of animals is composed of highly specialized cells called neurons, which can detect and receive and transmit different kinds of stimuli. The neural organization is very simple in lower invertebrates. For example, in Hydra, it is composed of a network of neurons. The neural system is better organized in insects where a brain is present along with a number of ganglia and neural tissues. The vertebrates have a more developed neural system. The human neural system. The human neural system is divided into two parts, the central neural system CNS and the peripheral neural system PNS. The CNS includes the CNS includes the brain and the spinal cord and is the site of information processing and control. The PNS comprises of all the nerves of the body associated with the CNS, brain and spinal cord. The nerve fibers of the PNS are of two types, afferent fibers and efferent fibers. The afferent nerve fibers transmit impulses from tissues or organs to the CNS, and the efferent fibers transmit regulatory impulses from the CNS to the concerned peripheral tissues or organs. The PNS is divided into two divisions called the somatic neural system and the autonomic neural system. The somatic neural system relays impulses from the CNS to skeletal muscles, and autonomic neural system transmit impulses from CNS to involuntary organs and smooth muscles for the body. Smooth muscles of the body. The autonomic neural system is further classified into sympathetic neural system and parasympathetic neural system. Visual nervous system is the part of the peripheral nervous system that comprises the whole complex of nerves, fibers, ganglia, and plexus by which impulses travel from the central nervous system to the viscera and from the viscera to the central nervous system. Neurons are structural and functional unit of neural system. A neuron is a microscopic structure composed of three major parts, namely cell body, dendrites, and axon, which you can see dendrites over here and Nissal's granule, cell body, nucleus, Schwann cells, axons. myelin sheath, which covers the neuron body, nodes of Ranvier, axon terminals, and you can observe over here a knob-shaped structure known as synaptic knob. Scotantic Nichols granule are called dendrites. These fibers transmit impulses towards the cell body. The axon is a long tube, the distal end of which is branched. Each branch terminates as bulb-like structure called synaptic knobs, which are present over here, which possess synaptic vesicles containing chemicals called neurotransmitters. The axons transmit nerve impulses away from the cell body to synapse to a neuromuscular junction. Based on the number of axon and dendrites, the neurons are divided into three types: the multipolar with one axon and two or more dendrites, found in the cerebral cortex; bipolar, one with one axon and one dendrite, found in the retina of eye; and unipolar, cell body with one axon only, found usually in the embryonic stage. There are two types of axons, namely myelinated and non-myelinated. The myelinated nerve fibers are enveloped with squamous cells which form a myelin sheath around the axon. The gaps between two adjacent myelin sheaths are called nodes of Ranvier. Myelinated nerve fibers are found in spinal and cranial nerves. Unmyelinated nerve fiber is enclosed by squamous cells that does not form a myelin sheath around the axon and is commonly found in the autonomous and the somatic neural system. Short fibers which branch repeatedly and project out of the cell body also. The generation and conduction of nerve impulses. Neurons are excitable cells because their membranes are in polarized state. Different types of ion channels are present on the neural membrane. These ion channels are selectively permeable to different ions. When a neuron is not conducting any impulse, that is resting, the axonal membrane is comparatively more permeable to potassium ions K+, and nearly impermeable to sodium ions Na+. Similarly, the membrane is impermeable to a negatively charged proteins present in the axoplasm. Consequently, the axoplasm inside the axon contains high concentration. In contrast, the fluid outside the axon contains a low concentration of K+, a high concentration of Na+, and thus form a concentration gradient. The ionic gradients across the resting membrane are maintained by the active transport of ions by sodium-potassium pump, which transports 3 Na plus outwards for 2 K plus into the cell. As a result, the outer surface of the of the hexagonal mem- of the axonal membrane possesses a positive charge while its inner surface becomes negatively charged and therefore is polarized. The electrical potential difference across the resting plasma membrane is called as the resting potential. You might have be curious to know about the mechanism of generation of nerve impulses and its conduction along the axon. When a stimulus is applied at a site of polarized membrane, the membrane at the site A becomes freely permeable to Na+. This leads to rapid influx of Na+, followed by the reversal of the polarity at the site, that is, the outer surface of the membrane becomes negatively charged and the inner side becomes positively charged. The polarity of the membranes at the site A is thus reversed and hence depolarized. The electric potential difference across the plasma membrane at the site A is called the action potential, which is in fact termed as the nerve impulse. At sites immediately ahead, the axon, example site B membrane, has a positive charge on the outer surface and a negative charge on its inner surface. As a result, a current flows on the inner surface from site A to site B. On the outer surface, current flows from site B to site A to complete the circuit of current flow. Hence, the polarity at the site is reversed and an action potential is generated at site B. Thus, the impulse or action potential generated at site A arrives at site B. The sequence is repeated along the length of the axon and consequently the impulse is conducted. The rise in the stimulus induced permeability to Na plus is extremely short-lived. It is quickly followed by a rise in permeability to K plus within a fraction of second. K plus diffuses outside the membrane and restores the resting potential of the membrane at the site of excitation, and the fiber becomes once more responsive to further stimulation. This is the diagrammatic representation of impulse conduction through an axon at points A and B. Transmission of impulses. A nerve impulse is transmitted through neuron to another through junctions called synapses. Through these synapses have presynaptic membrane, synaptic cleft, and postsynaptic membranes. These are neurotransmitters. These are receptors. These, this is an axon terminal and this is an axon. There are two types of synapses, namely electrical synapses and chemical synapses. A synapse is formed by the membranes of presynaptic neuron, postsynaptic neuron, which may or may not be separated by the gap called synaptic cleft. There are two types of synapses, namely electrical synapse and chemical synapses. The electrical synapses, the membranes of pre and post synaptic neurons are in very close proximity. Electrical synapses. Electrical current can flow directly from one neuron to the other across these synapses. Transmission of an impulse across electrical synapses is very similar to the impulse conduction along a single axon. Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than that across a chemical synapse. Transmission of an impulse across electrical synapses is very similar to impulse conduction along a single axon. Impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster than that across a chemical synapse. Electrical synapses are rare in our system. At a chemical synapse, the membranes of the pre and postsynaptic neurons are separated by a fluid filled space called synaptic cleft. Chemicals called neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of impulses at these synapses. The axon terminals contain vesicles filled with these neurotransmitters. When an impulse or action potential arrives at the axon terminal, it stimulates the movement of the synaptic vesicles towards the membrane where they fuse with the plasma membrane and release their neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft. The synaptic cleft. The released neurotransmitters bind to their specific receptors present on the postsynaptic membranes. This binding opens ion channels, allowing the entry of ions which can generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. The new potential developed may be either excitatory or inhibitory. Central neural system. The brain is the central neural system. The brain is the central information processing organ of our body and acts as the command and control system. It controls the voluntary movements, balance of the body, functioning of the vital involuntary organs, example lungs, heart, kidneys, etc. Thermoregulation, hunger and thirst, circadian rhythms, the rhythms which occur 24 hours of our body, activities of the several endocrine glands and human behavior. It is also the site for processing of vision, hearing, speech, memory, intelligence, emotions, and thoughts. Intelligence, emotion, and thoughts. The human brain is well protected by the skull. Inside the skull, the brain is covered by the cranial meninges consisting of an outer layer called dura mater and a very thin middle layer called arachnoid, and the inner layer which is in contact with the brain tissue called pia mater. The brain can be divided into three major parts: forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Midbrain consists of midbrain is present over here, and the hindbrain consists of pons, cerebellum, medulla. From the brain, the spinal cord also extends. This part is known as cerebral aqueduct, and this part is comes under the midbrain, which is known as corpus callosum, and this is known as cerebrum hemisphere. Forebrain. The forebrain consists of cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Cerebrum forms the major part of the human brain. The deep cleft divides the cerebrum longitudinally into two halves, which are termed as the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. The hemispheres are connected by a tract of nerve fibers called corpus callosum. The layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemispheres is called cerebral cortex and is thrown into prominent folds. The cerebral cortex is referred to as the gray matter due to the grayish appearance. The neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas, and large regions that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. These regions, called as the association areas, are responsible for complex functions like intersensory associations, memory, and communications. Fibers of the tracts are covered with the myelin sheath, which constitute the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere. They give an opaque white appearance to the layer and hence is called the white matter. The cerebrum wraps around a structure called thalamus, which is major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. The layer of cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere is called cerebral cortex and is thrown into the prominent folds. The cerebral cortex is referred to as the gray matter due to its grayish appearance. The neuron cell bodies are concentrated here, giving the color. The cerebral cortex contains motor areas, sensory areas, and large regions that are neither clearly sensory nor motor in function. These regions, called as the association areas, are responsible for complex functions like intersensory associations, memory, and communication. Fibers of the tracts are covered with the myelin sheath, which constitute the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere. They give an opaque, white appearance to the layer and hence is called the white matter. The cerebrum wraps around a structure called thalamus, which is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. Another very important part of the brain called hypothalamus lies at the base of the thalamus. The hypothalamus contains a number of centers which control body temperature. The hypothalamus contains a number of centers which control body temperature, urge for eating and drinking. It also contains several groups of neurosecretory cells which secrete hormones called hypothalamic hormones. The inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere and a group of associated deep structures like amygdala, hippocampus, etc., from a complex structure called the limbic lobe and a limbic system. Along with the hypothalamus, it is involved in the regulation of sexual behavior, expressions of emotional reactions, example, excitement, pleasure, rage, and fear, and motivation. Midbrain. The midbrain is located between the thalamus or hypothalamus of the forebrain and pons of the hindbrain. The canal called the cerebral aqueduct passes through the midbrain. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists of mainly the four round swelling lobes called corpora quadragemina. Hindbrain. The hindbrain comprises of pons, cerebellum, and medulla, also called the medulla oblongata. Pons consists of the fiber tract that interconnect different regions of the brain. Cerebellum has very convoluted surface in order to provide the additional space for many more neurons. The medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. The medulla contains centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, and gastric secretions. Three major regions make up the brain stem: midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Brainstem forms the connections between the brain and the spinal cord. Reflex action and reflex arc. You must have experienced a sudden withdrawal of body part which comes in contact with objects that are extremely hot, cold, pointed, or animals that are scary or poisonous. The entire process of response to a peripheral nervous stimulation that occurs involuntarily, that is without conscious effort or through or thought, and requires the involvement of a part of the central nervous system, is called reflex action. The reflex pathway comprises at least one afferent neuron or receptor, and one efferent effector or exciter neuron, efferent neuron, approximately arranged in a series. The afferent neuron receives signal from the sensory organ and transmits the impulse via a dorsal nerve route into the CNS at the level of spinal cord. The afferent neuron that then carries signals from CNS to the effector, the stimulus and the response thus forms a reflex arc as shown below in the knee-jerk reflex. You should carefully study to understand the mechanism of knee-jerk reflex. These are the response stimulus with a knee-jerk reflex, muscle sphenic receptor, afferent pathway through the dorsal root ganglion, and it is an efferent pathway. Sensory reception and processing. The sensory organs detect all types of the changes in the environment and send appropriate signals to the CNS, where all the inputs and process are processed and analyzed. The signals are then sent to different parts or centers of the brain. This is how you can sense changes in the environment. Sense organs. The smell, we smell things by our nose, taste by tongue, hear by ear, and see objects by eyes. The nose contains mucus coated receptors which are specialized for receiving the sense of smell and called olfactory receptors. These are made up of olfactory epithelium that consists of three kinds of cells. The neurons of the olfactory epithelium extend from outside environment directly into a pair of broad bean-sized organs called olfactory bulb, which are extensions of the brain's limbic system. Both nose and tongue detect dissolved chemicals. The chemical senses of gustation, taste, and olfactory smell are functionally similar and interrelated. The tongue detects taste through the taste buds containing gustatory receptors, which, with each taste of food or sip of drink, the brain integrates the differential input from the taste buds and a complex flavor is perceived. In the following sections, you will be introduced to the structure and functioning of the eye sensory organ for vision and the ear sensory organ for hearing. Eye. Our paired eyes are located in the sockets of the skull called orbits. A brief account of structure and function of the human eye is given in the following section. Parts of eye. The adult human eyeball is nearly a spherical in structure. The wall of is nearly a spherical structure. The wall of the eyeball is composed of three layers. The external layer is composed of a dense connective tissue and is called the sclera. The anterior portion of this layer is called the cornea. The middle layer, choroid, contains many blood vessels and looks bluish in color. The choroid layer is thin over the posterior two-thirds of the eyeball, but it becomes thick in the anterior part to form the ciliary body. The ciliary body itself continues forward to form a pigmented and opaque structure called the iris, which is the visible colored portion of the eye. The eyeball contains a transparent crystalline lens which is held in place by ligaments attached to the ciliary body. In front of the lens, the aperture surrounded by the iris is called the pupil. The diameter of the pupil is regulated by the muscle fibers of iris. Here in the eye structure, you can see aqueous chamber, cornea, lens, iris, ciliary body, retina, sclera, choroid, optic nerves, blind spot, fovea, vitreous humor. The inner layer is the retina and it contains three layers of neural cells from inside to outside: ganglion cells, bipolar cells, and photoreceptor cells. There are two types of photoreceptor cells, namely rods and cones. These cells contain the light sensitive proteins called the photoligaments. The daylight photopic vision and the color vision are functions of cones, and tilt scotopic vision is the functions of the rods. The rod contain purplish red protein called the rhodopsin or visual purple, which contains a derivative of vitamin A. In the human eye, there are three types of cones which possess their own characteristic photopigments that respond to red, green, and blue lights. The sensation of different colors are produced by various combinations of these cones and their photopigments. These, when these cones are stimulated equally, a sensation of white light is produced. The optic nerves leave the eye and the neural and the retinal blood vessels and enter it at a point blood vessels and enter it at a point medial to and slightly above the posterior pole of the eyeball. Photoreceptor cells are not present in the region and hence it is called a blind spot. At the posterior pole of the eye, lateral to the blind spot, there is a yellowish pigmented spot called macula lutea with a central pit called the fovea. With a central pit called the fovea. The fovea is the thinned out portion of the retina where only the cones are densely packed. Where only the cones are densely packed. It is the point where the visual act, acuity resolution is the greatest, or resolution is the greatest. The space between the cornea and the lens is called the aqueous chamber and contains a thin watery fluid called aqueous humor. The space between the lens and the retina is called the vitreous chamber and is filled with the transparent gel called vitreous humor. Mechanism of vision. The light rays in visible wavelength focused on the retina through the cornea and lens generate potentials or impulses in rods and cones. As mentioned earlier, the photosensitive compounds photopigments in the human eyes is composed of opsin, a protein, and a retinal and aldehyde of vitamin A. Light induces dissociation of the retinal from opsin, resulting in changes in the structure of the opsin. This causes membrane permeability changes. As a result, potential differences are generated in the photoreceptor cells. This produces a signal that generates action potentials in the ganglionic cells through the bipolar cells. These action potential or impulses are transmitted by the optic nerves to the visual cortex area of the brain, where the neural impulses are analyzed and the image formed of the retina is recognized based on the earlier memory and experience. The ear. The ear performs two sensory functions: hearing and maintenance of body balance. Anatomically, the ear can be divided into three major sections called the outer ear and the middle ear and the inner ear. The outer ear consists of the pinna and the external auditory meatus uh, or external auditory canal. The pinna collects the vibrations in the air which produce sound. The external auditory meatus leads inwards and extends to the tympanic membrane, the eardrum. These are very fine. There are very fine hair and wax secreting glands in the skin of the pinna and the meatus. The tympanic membrane is composed of connective tissues covered with the skin outside and with mucous membrane inside. The middle ear contains three ossicles called malleus, incus, and stapes, which are attached to one another in a chain-like fashion. This is attached to the tympanic membrane, and the stape is attached to the oval window of the cochlea. The ear ossicles increases the efficiency of transmission of sound waves to the inner ear, and Eustachian tube contains Eustachian tube connects the middle ear cavity with the pharynx. The Eustachian tube helps in equalizing the pressures on the either sides of the eardrum. The fluid-filled inner ear called labyrinth consists of two parts, the bony and the membranous labyrinths. The bony labyrinth in a series of channels. Inside these channels lies the membranous labyrinth, which is surrounded by a fluid called perilymph. The membranous labyrinth is filled with a fluid called endolymph. The, the coiled portion of the labyrinth is called cochlea. The, the membranes constituting cochlea, the Regeners and the divide the surrounding perilymph filled bony labyrinth into an upper scala vestibuli and the lower scala tympani. The space within cochlea called scala media is filled with endolymph. At the base of the cochlea, the scala vestibuli ends at the oval window, while the scala tympani terminates at round window which opens to the middle ear. The organ of Corti is a structure located at the basilar membrane, which contains hair cells that act as auditory receptors. The hair cells are present in rows of the internal side of the organ of Corti. The basal, the basal end of the hair cell is in close contact with the afferent nerve fibers. A large number of processes called stereocilia are projected from the apical part of each hair cell. Above the rows of the hair cells is a thin elastic membrane called tectorial membrane. The inner ear also contains a complex system called the vestibular apparatus. The vestibular apparatus located above the cochlea. The vestibular apparatus is composed of these semicircular canals, and this otolith macula is the sensory part of the saccule and utricle. Each semicircular canal lies in the different plane at right angles to each other. The membranous canals are suspended in the perilymph of the bony canals. The base of the canals is swollen and is called ampulla, which contains a projecting ridge called crista ampullaris, which has hair cells. The saccule and utricle contain a projecting ridge called macula. The crista and macula are the specific receptors of the vestibular apparatus responsible for maintenance of balance of the body and posture. Mechanism of hearing. The external ear ossicles, the external ear receives sound waves and directs them to eardrum. The eardrum vibrates in response to the sound waves, and these vibrations are transmitted through the ear ossicles, malleus, incus, and stapes to the oval window. The vibrations are passed through the oval window on the fluid of the cochlea, where they generate waves in the limbs. The waves in the limbs induce a ripple in the basilar membrane. These movements of the basilar membrane bend the hair cells, pressing them against the tectoral membrane. As a result, now impulses are generated in the associated efferent neurons. These impulses are transmitted by the efferent fibers via auditory nerves to the auditory cortex of the brain, where the impulses are analyzed and the sound is recognized. Here you can see resonance membranes, scala media, organ of Corti, basilar membrane, scala tympani, tectoral membrane, scala vestibuli. Here ends our chapter. You can mail me through vickysneetprep@gmail.com, or you can ping me in Instagram by following my account vickysneetprep. You can find my Instagram account by scanning this Insta code easily. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to Vickys Prep. Thank you.